serious prostitutes, escorts, strippers, other kinds of sex workers. What was your first day on the job like? I wasn't a pro, but when I was 16 and homeless, an older gentleman offered me a serious chunk of money for a weekend. He thought I was 14. I was hunger skinny, so it was believable. He had a hotel room, bought me some clean clothes and macup, and left me alone for a few hours to get the street off of me. When he got back, he threw out my old clothes and took me to dinner. I spent 3 days with him and none of it was terrible. I wasn't living my best life at the time, so the bar was pretty low. He was polite to me and wasn't rough. He let me drink in the evenings, but never let me get drunk or high, and had me call him dad in public. He told me it was because it would look odd otherwise, but I called him a normal name that I'm sure wasn't his real name when we were alone, so it didn't feel particularly predatory. I never told him my name, so he called me Anna. We went out during the days, sometimes to eat or shop, once to the zoo, and sometimes I'd stay at the hotel while he went out. He didn't tell me much about himself and his life. Lots of old anecdotes from his younger years and silly stories. He liked me to tell him about my life. Stupid teenage garbage about my friends and parents. What kinds of things I liked and why. When we parted, he gave me a bit of cash, but used most of the money we agreed on to get me a motel room for a month. He talked about being worried about how I was living. Beyond the money I earned, he spent a bunch on groceries and toiletries that I didn't see until after he left, so I couldn't thank him. But I felt more cared for by this stranger who paid an underage girl for sex than anybody else in my life. He also extended my stay with management for another 2 weeks. The owner came to my door and told me not to check out yet. Having a room with a lock helped me hugely. I wasn't being robbed anymore, so I could work small jobs and hide cash. And I didn't have to worry about the violence I was trying to avoid before. And I wasn't taking drugs every day because my life didn't disgust me. When my stay ended, I was able to move into a group home and live a bit cleaner and safer, and never did the streets thing again. I did plenty of drugs and drinking, but just for fun and with friends, not to stay warm or stay awake. For context, this was in Canada and was very illegal. Terrifying. I was 21 years old and had never even stepped foot inside a strip club. I had bought a matching bra and underwear set from Mars Halls along with regular heels. Big mistake. I was told to watch the dancer before me on stage, who of course was gorgeous and clearly knew what she was doing. I went up there and immediately busted my ass because of the normal sized heels. The rest of the time was just spent holding on to the pole for dear life and hoping I wouldn't get fired for being the worst dancer they'd ever witnessed. I wasn't fired and eventually got the hang of everything, but I still cringe at how awful those first initial days were. I started as a waitress in a strip club. 3 months later I tried dancing. My first time in the VIP, where I had been seeing the workflow for 3 months, so I knew what to say and where to go. But my hands were shaking. The guy even asked me if I was okay. After that first hour it was fine, but my body literally was shaking in the beginning. I didn't feel scared, though. It was a natural reaction. You must found a nice place if your first dude was genuinely concerned if you were okay with it. It was Bourbon Street Circus, run by the legendary Bob. One of the best managers I ever worked for, period. He never slept with the girls. Stripped briefly to pay for a semester's worth of tuition and books. On my first day, a lady shouted, "Whip out your pecker." And I couldn't help but to laugh from both nerves and the fact she said pecker. After that, the rest seemed pretty easy. I knew what it would be like going into it. I'd been working for the agency for a few months as a driver, taking the girls to their appointments, making sure they didn't get robbed or killed. My boss mentioned that he had had some interest from females wanting a male escort. I'd seen Deuce Bigelow. I figured, why the hell not? I was 18, and I cleaned up pretty nice. My first client was a woman in her late 30s. Not a supermodel, but not unattractive at all. She was in town for some auto parts convention and wanted someone to show her around. We wound up sleeping together after I got my money and left the next morning. I did that until I moved out of state 3 years later. I was a cam girl for a little bit. First time was with my roommate. She had been doing it, and I knew she was a cam girl. She was making more in one night than I was from babysitting like 4 times a week. It was really awkward at first, but my roommate was a pro and played into it. First time lesbian sorta thing. Those tokens were flying in. Despite it being awkward, it was fun, and we made a lot. So I started my own account, became a cam girl. I did phone sex for a bit, and the first day was awkward. I felt like I was in a corny porno from the 80s. There were also a surprisingly high number of men that asked which area I lived in and were weirdly insisting on knowing. I'm guessing BC it was over the phone, it felt more real to them. After a couple of hours I got into my role, and moaning like a bad actress became easier and funnier, but the first hours definitely felt awkward. I worked independently as an escort, so there wasn't really anyone to give me advice on what to expect. I read some websites here and there with general advice and set up a profile. The first few messages were people trying to scam me or looking for free nudes, and eventually somebody came through who seemed genuine. We discussed everything and then set a meetup at his place. Followed up with a phone call as I was setting off to confirm. Seemed a bit shifty over the phone, which made me nervous, and I didn't fully understand the directions to his place. I walked in circles around several apartment blocks being lost and called him nearly in tears because I couldn't figure out where to go. He ended up standing outside his block, so I saw him, and he actually looked normal lol. Slightly balding, wearing a t-shirt and jeans with round face and a kind expression. I can still picture him waving at me and me running towards him like a lost child who just found their parent. Got inside his apartment, ushered him into the shower with me, and then the actual sex part was over fairly quickly. He booked a whole hour and we probably spent 45 minutes just talking about his life, video games and movies we like. The job has its ups and downs, but after that I stopped being so nervous and learned it wasn't as difficult as I thought. Most of my job was just being a good listener and boosting egos. Make people feel good about themselves. I'm convinced that a business that just had nice people to share a cup of coffee with would be successful. There's just a lot of lonely people in the world. Former male stripper here. It was awesome. It was comedic, sexy, and fun. Just an absolute party. The crowd had a blast. We quintuple lap danced the bachelorettes. It didn't pay much, but I wasn't really in it for the money. I would totally start another show if I can make it happen. I only had 2 brief uncomfortable moments that night. First, an old woman just grabbed my goodies. Second, another old woman shoved $1 so far between my cheeks that I didn't see it until after the show. She was making a deposit. I'm 21 and was an oil wrestler for a short time just last year, and I was terrified. I had no practice or was shown anything. I made $10 in tips that night, but as it went on for the next 3 weeks, I began making more. The girls were really clique-y and at times total bitches. The men we entertained were disgusting low hygiene cowboys and rude as fuck. Not my scene, but nothing but respect for the women who are able to have fun in that environment. Escort in a brothel. Edit. Escort is a commonly used synonym for all the other words for full service sex worker where I'm from. Making a note as there has been some confusion. Honestly, my first day was a mixed bag. The other girl I worked with was hilarious and properly took me under her wing and fed me a glass of wine before my first John to settle my nerves. I haven't drank on the job since that day, but that one drink really helped. I got tipped by one client, assaulted by another. When I was assaulted though, the other worker, the receptionist and my boss all had my back and gave him a proper telling off and barred him. This was a one-off, it hasn't happened since. I've never felt safer in any other job, and I have more control. I walked home that day with more money than I'd earned in a week in my last job. I've never looked back. Do you still work there? Yes, I do. I'm planning on doing more independent work once this pandemic's settled. But my plan has always been to still do a few shifts a month. Sex work can be so isolating, so it's good for the social aspect if nothing else. I'm long retired now, but I was 21 at the time and at a loose end. New city and no job, so decided to work at a gentleman's club as a prostitute. I'd done my research and been in for an interview, so I was feeling confident and relaxed. No one else showed up on time, so I was the only girl there on the day shift and sat chatting to the receptionists. My first client was a really good looking English/SRI Lankan guy who was really sweet and equally nervous. We both couldn't believe it was the other's first time until we were both fumbling and laughing trying to put a condom on correctly. I can't remember who else I saw that day, but I do remember getting paid more than I had earned in a week working 2 jobs. I ended up working for around 7 years and really enjoyed it. Was a stripper in my late teens. First day I was nervous as fuck. Some drunk dude walks up to the stage waving a dollar bill and said, "Slap your ass. I'll give you $1." Oddly enough, that made me somehow more comfortable with the whole thing. I actually enjoyed it and wasn't half bad. Made more money, legally, from 17 to 20 than any other job I had until like 2 years ago. I'm 37 now. I had a friend at uni who stripped for a while. She was a proper girl next door type girl. Last person you'd expect to do it. She told me she found it empowering, which I never really understood. She also said she wanted to prove to herself she could. I don't know if that was a body confidence thing or something, but regardless, I got the impression she at least didn't hate it. There's definitely a cool power dynamic with you want to touch me, but you can't. So you're paying money just to look at me. Not to mention it takes some cojones to get up on a stage in general. I'm glad it sounds like she had an alright time of it. Not to mention the sheer athleticism it takes to be a stripper. I had a stripper deadlift me one-armed, and I weigh about 200 lbs. Brew them some goals. I do pole dance, and I'm friends with a bunch of strippers and they're so strong it breaks my brain. Like, how do you hold your body perpendicular to the floor and look like it's nothing? How do you casually deadlift your ass over your head into a handstand and look hot while doing it? PLS explain. A bit intimidating, but not really much different. If anything, I had a little better of an idea of what I was doing compared to working at Starbucks. Did escorting for about a year. First day was relieving. I was terrified at first because I was given the rundown for what redheads to look out for. There were a lot, but I went on. Most of my clients ended up being older men who just wanted a pretty girl to be seen with and to listen to them. My first day felt more like a therapist than an escort. I'm naive to escort related stuff. What about redheads now? Pretty sure that is an autocorrect of red flags. I don't really know if this counts, but I'll share anyway. I'm not a sex worker, although I was paid in the somewhat recent past to work a glory hole. The glory hole was in the staff bathroom of a club not far from my student accommodation. I was told that certain guests were going to be given the option to use the staff bathroom for the glory hole, but not to expect that many people. I was paid £200 each night and I worked 2 weekends in a row. My first night, and pretty much every night, was very scary. My expectation was that a dick would come through the hole. I blow it until he comes and job done. I didn't accept that I was going to have abuse shouted at me, having people look over and under the cubicle and threatened. Every night I complained to the manager and he promised to do something about it, but nothing ever really changed. Like I said, I only worked 2 weekends because it was really scary. Hope this was somewhat relevant. I never knew glory holes existed outside of adult bookstores or gay clubs. I thought they were urban legends. Well, it probably was in a gay club. Went to ops profile to see if they were a dude or chick. Saw the ass and thought definitely not a gay club. Then I looked at the sub. Boy, was I wrong. I was kicked out / left on my own. It's complicated. At 19, I saw the writing on the wall and needed money fast. So I started as a stripper at 18. The Great Recession happened a few years later, and so I moved to escorting at 22. First job as a dancer was with 2 other girls to a private party. I had something of a debut, and while I had no idea what I was doing, I had my heels on, and I knew how to shake my butt. I had literally $200 in singles just drained on top of me. 30 minutes of work. Who knew how much the other girls made? But I was hooked. The economy took a huge downturn a few years later. and so many of my regular hot times were not as prolific. I only worked on call, private parties / bachelor parties / rush week, etc. as I wanted to stay out of a fixed location but this would up hurting me in the long run. I turned to escorting through an agency who actually was pretty kind, and I'm still amazed I never had to audition for any of my agencies. Close bracket. He set me up with a John, who was an utter gentleman, kind and considerate, explained his side of things in a way that made sense, and helped me find peace and less of a sense of guilt about what I was doing. I saw him a couple of times, but I think after that my novelty wore off, which is fine. Every once in a while my thoughts float to him and his beautiful golden retrievers. I hope he's living a good life somewhere. I'm pretty sure my life would have went a different way without those two experiences. And don't get me wrong, I've had plenty of just raunchy, awful, ungodly, unforgivable things done and said to me in my career for the sake of rent. But holding on to the few bright moments I had helped me make it through to financial and familial freedom as well as retirement from the industry. I was 18 and naive. My first client chose me because I was new fresh meat. He was a regular at the club. I was terrified, but went along with it. He made me call him daddy, and every time he pushed into me, I winced from pain. He secretly took the condom off. The manager or girl who gave me her introduction tour never warned me of clients trying to take off condoms. I couldn't tell management about him, since he was a regular at the club. They also never told me there was an emergency button to leave the room if I needed to. I only learned 3 years later when a client beat me. That's when I decided it was my last day. I find it so weird that people would take off the condom. If they are sick, they are huge assholes, and if they aren't, well, that is probably a quick way to be because of other assholes. I hope you are healthy and fine. I quickly learned the tricks to knowing who was going to take the condom off. When they tried to, I said, what if I have a disease? They just stare at me dumbfounded, but don't try again. I guess they are just ignorant, you know. It sounds weird, but I think that makes it worse. Like, how can you be that ignorant? Anyway, thanks for your response. Take care. First job in the industry was a sexting operator for a dating website. I found out it was a scam. I was basically a bot and never got paid for talking to people. Lol, they owe me at least $120. I hope their site is exposed one day. Edit. First day was weird. I had to cater to a bunch of random guys. There was no training. Just thrown into random chats with random guys. I basically made up nonsense to keep the convo going so they could buy more credits to make the website rich while we get nothing. I was basically the person that was like, Don backquote to you like talking to me. Why won't you buy more credits then? Edit 2. Oh, I also forgot to mention. I remember feeling really weird the first day because as bots we had access to a bunch of random women's nudes. They looked like amateur porn stars or something, but I remember being like, who are these women? It just felt wrong. I was a dancer in my college years. I was so nervous, not because of the dancing, but because I was afraid I didn't look as good as the other girls / they wouldn't like me. It turns out they were so sweet and so diverse. One of my coworkers had 5 young kids. One of them was a PhD candidate at one of the local universities. One of them loved to bake in her spare time. Sharing small details like that about our lives made us grow together. Most of the regulars that came in were average guys. Nothing weird or creepy. Eventually, when you got to know them enough, they would talk about things that stressed them out, like their debt or their job or my 13-year-old daughter is smoking. IDK what to do, and you'd be more of a listener and advice giver instead of a sexual being. I was a male escort very briefly in the early zeros. My first call was for a married couple at a hotel room in a casino. I arrived and went to the front desk to let them know I had arrived. This was before everybody had a cell phone, and I was told to wait in the lobby. It seemed like forever, and the longer I waited the more nervous I became. Until the wife walked up to me and asked if I was Jeremy, fake name. She was very attractive, and that was a relief. She took me up to their room, where her husband was waiting nude in a chair. He was very much not attractive. He started barking orders at us to undress and do this and do that. I was fine with that. Like I said, she was very attractive. Eventually he decides to join in and it suddenly is very awkward as he's quite out of shape and is having difficulty doing pretty much anything. This goes on for a while until he gets upset and huffs "We're done here" and rolls off the bed to look outside the window and, I don't know, pout. I get dressed in a hurry while the wife is at the bar making a drink wearing just his shirt with a weird smile on her face. I try to quietly take my leave, but she grabs me by the arm, almost drowns me by pouring this drink down my throat, gives me a kiss, and pushes me out the door. I felt a little weird, but I made $300 in less than an hour. I think I was just too young and inexperienced back then. I could be a pretty good escort now, but my selling point back then was that I looked younger than I was. And now I look like a fat extra from Sons of Anarchy. Anyway, it wasn't bad. It wasn't great. 5/10 for the hot wife. Former exotic dancer of 3 years. The first night was intimidating, in part because the other dancers are generally hostile toward new girls. That may have just been the case at that club. I'm not sure, but also because the job itself is so heavily stigmatized that you find yourself afraid that somebody you know will see you. That faded after a few weeks though, and it was actually a really fun job. You should always be careful not to fall into the lifestyle though. Keep work and personal lives separate. 6. 9k. Dare I say. Nice double edit. 6. 9 was a 69 reference. Hence the nice. Didn't mean to confuse anybody, sorry.